before all of you today, so I'm going to do it right here. Good morning, handsome minister. I know you're going to give an awesome sermon today. I know if anyone falls asleep, it's not because of me, but because they are tired. I also know if anyone leaves, it's not because of me, but because of the score on the football game. And finally, we can engage in, if you want to join me, hold your mirror up and look at it. We will engage from a quote from the great sage Stuart Smalley and say, why? Because I'm good enough? Well, don't jump ahead of it. Because I'm good enough, repeat after me. I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. All right, good job. Give yourself a round of applause. That's great. The power of the reflection. I like that we gave out a mirror today too, because my first impression of this church actually came from a mirror. I was in my late teens, way back in the 1990s, and I came to this church to be part of a teen planning in the office building there upstairs, and there was a sign on the wall, and it said, "Lift to see the most beautiful thing in the world." And I lifted it up, and there was the mirror. Aww. And initially I thought, oh, this is pretty foo-foo, but as you think about it, and as you look into that mirror, it's important to remember that there's a lot of truth in that statement. That I really am a precious being. That I really am a unique expression of God. And that means that you are a beautiful expression of God. You are an awesome, unique expression of the infinite. You indeed are a manifestation of absolute love, absolute beauty, absolute expression of what is most sacred in this world. It is really and actually true. I love something that the great scholar Jean Houston said. She said, "We all have extraordinary coded within us, waiting to be released." Do you believe that? Yeah. We all have extraordinary coded within our very veins, within our very being, coded within us, waiting to be released. And how do we release it? Self-acceptance. When we get to that point that we can commit to accepting the truth of our own being, we open the door of our heart for who we are to come forward and transform not only our lives, but to be an example for others to follow as well. I loved doing teen work as a teen. I loved working with teens as a young adult, so much so that by the time I went into ministerial school, I had mainly only been to 1 or 2 Sunday morning services in my life. I always got to work with teens. It was so much fun. And the biggest challenge was never the teens, it was the parents and the advisors working with the teens. And one thing I really enjoyed was putting on some workshops and classes and things for adults who wanted to work with teens. And the central thing that I knew that I had to do with those leaders was somewhere to get them to embrace or have a consciousness of their own magnificence. Because the central purpose of our work with the teenagers was to create a space for them to get a glimpse into their own magnificence and to hopefully embody it to a degree so they could practice it in their lives. So with these adults, at some point in the introductions or somewhere later on, I would try to get them to stand up and declare, "I am magnificent. My name is Tony and I am magnificent. My name is Janet and I am magnificent." And it was amazing how much folks struggled with that. Don't make me say that. That's embarrassing. I'm too humble to say that, or I don't believe that. I'm incredibly flawed. And I could hear where each and every one of them were coming from, but how are you going to work with these teens and help them see and embody magnificence if you're unwilling to declare it or even know it about yourselves? And it's true for all of us. When you think about what you want the people you love the most to know and embody about themselves, how are you going to do that if you can't see it in yourself? If you can't practice it yourself? If you are unwilling to become or be a space for it in your own consciousness? All that being said, I don't mean to say that there isn't a lot of narcissism out there, especially in teenagers today, it seems like, or in adults today. There's a lot of self-centeredness. There's a lot of thinking we're more special than other people. But I think it's important to recognize that this isn't that type of recognition of magnificence within ourselves, that's about worshiping one's reflection. That idea of I'm more special than anybody else and I have this big sense of entitlement. That's the kind of warning that we get in the story of Narcissus who gets frozen looking at his reflection in the lake, or the lesson we get from the queen in Snow White who gets obsessed with mirror, mirror on the wall, right? What I'm talking about in accepting and embodying our own magnificence is just accepting the very fact of our own presence and being, the fact of our existence. I get lost to that most basic truth of my existence. I don't know about you. The mirror can even confuse me. When I look into a mirror, it's never a connection. It's always a confrontation. Do you have that experience? It's a confrontation between who I think I am and the reflection coming back to me and the judgments that I usually already have about it before it even shows up there. So it's really, actually rarely that I really see myself when I look in the mirror. And what I hope happens is who I think I am and the reflection of me in the mirror cancel each other out, so that I can get to the point where I can release some of those thoughts which are often limiting, damaging, and withholding, and let go of what I think the world or someone else might think about the reflection that they see there in the mirror, to just see myself, to accept myself as I am in that moment, an expression of the divine. It sounds like the most simple thing to do, and yet it's the most difficult for many of us to simply accept ourselves and to recognize that by living in that acceptance, we bring our truest gifts into the world by being authentic, sincere expressions of who we are. It's a little paradoxical, but I think it's very much true. It's not until we really accept and love ourselves that we can give ourselves to a cause greater than we are. It's not until we really love and accept ourselves that the gift of commitment can really show up in our lives. Maybe we've learned that before. Those of us who've ever had fear of commitment, anyone here ever had that before? Anyone here still practicing that from time to time? It's never about what you're committing to. It's never even about another person. It's about ourselves. It's about committing to be who we are. It's about being comfortable in our own skin. But when we can accept ourselves, we can give ourselves to that cause greater than we are. Howard Thurman put it this way. He said, commitment means that it is possible for a man to yield the nerve center of his consent to a purpose or cause, a movement or an ideal, which may be more important to him than whether he lives or dies. It's a pretty deep question, but I invite you to ask that to yourself. What are those causes or individuals or ways of being that are more important and sacred to you than even your own physical life? Do you have those things, and are you living in accordance with them? One of my favorite expressions of commitment is who Michael Jaime was talking about earlier, and someone who learned a lot from Howard Thurman that I just quoted from, and that's Martin Luther King Jr. Such an expression of learning to accept oneself in order to dedicate oneself to a cause greater than oneself. And one of the lesser known stories about Dr. King is, of course, in the late 60s he would be murdered, but he almost died in 1958 on a book tour for his book, Striving Towards Freedom. He was at a book study, and he was already receiving death threats at that time, but he must have been surprised when a young black woman stabbed him with a letter opener. He almost died, and there's a famous letter that was written to him while he was getting well that he would once share. And it said, Dr. King, it's from a young boy, Dr. King, I read in the papers that the doctor said that if you would have sneezed, the puncture was so near your aorta, you would have died. And the boy ends the letter by saying, Dr. King, I am so glad you didn't sneeze. But it shows you the preciousness of life. how a sneeze can change the course of history one way or another, or how a left or right turn in your own life can completely change the course of history and purpose in your own life. And of course, for Dr. King, we're so grateful that he didn't sneeze, because he was able more and more in his life, even in the face of incredible death threats, to perform the great example that he was for so many of us, bringing and standing for greater brotherhood and sisterhood and justice. The sad part of the story is murder caught up with Dr. King. He'd be tragically taken from us, and so we also have to ask ourselves the question, how much better might things be if that didn't happen, if that sneeze had happened a different way? How much more causes Dr. King would have taken his commitment to nonviolence to help transform in the world. And it again points a finger back to us and asks us, not what are we martyring ourselves about, but what are those causes we're dedicating ourselves to our lives that we are able to do because we know and understand and feel the preciousness of what life is within ourselves, because we know in our bones life is sacred. And through accepting that again, making the commitment to accept it about ourselves, we allow it to take place around us. I love something that I read that happened at the Alabama Christian Church in Alabama when Dr. King was there. They handed out a sheet during the movement taking place there about committing one's life to nonviolence. And it goes like this. It was like a pledge card. It said, I hereby pledge myself, my person and body, to the nonviolent movement. Therefore, I will keep the following 10 commandments. 1, meditate daily on the teachings and life of Jesus. 2, remember always that the nonviolent movement seeks justice and reconciliation, not victory. 3, walk and talk in the manner of love, for God is love. 4, pray daily to be used by God in order that all men might be free. 5, sacrifice personal wishes in order that all men might be free. 6, observe with both friend and foe the ordinary rules of courtesy. 7, seek to perform regular service for others and for the world. 8, refrain from the violence of fist, tongue, or heart. 9, strive to be in good spiritual and bodily health. 10, follow the directions of the movement and of the captain on a demonstration. It goes on to say, I sign this pledge, having seriously considered what I do and with a determination and will to persevere. Very powerful. Could you sign that pledge? And there's something really smart about Dr. King and the team that articulated this pledge. Notice that it's not pointed at any issue, at any gender, or any race, and there's a reason why. And that was because they knew until you get it in your own life, you can't apply it to an issue. Until we can be nonviolent within ourselves. Until we can practice that love and brotherhood and sisterhood in our own families. We can't go start applying it to the issues of race relations or equal rights, or what King wanted to apply it more in his later life too, to poverty, to peace in the world. It's not until we are able to embody and identify these principles within ourselves that we can begin to be an example for others around us to begin to follow. I'd like to wonder, what type of pledge card would we create in this church for how we live our lives? What would be some of the statements that you would commit to that are greater than yourself and your being? Does anyone have one? Maybe it's just equality. Anybody? Authenticity. All right. Anybody else?
Self-acceptance.
Self-acceptance, yeah.
I always stand for love.
I always stand for love. Yeah, so these are unique to where we are in our times and our individuals, but they're very similar to the ones that were taking place here in 1963. I think there's something really powerful in the causes we commit to in our lives, and they may not all wind up on the news. We may not become famous because of them, but in your family, in your work, the consciousness and commitment you make to a higher quality of being makes a difference in the world around you. Something I love about our church community here too is that we're part of a legacy. That this church exists for some of what happens within these walls, but more for what the people who make commitments to themselves here do when they're not within these walls. I love the idea. I had a powerful experience confronting a mistake in my ministry. We painted the church last year, and I took down everything off the walls. And we were doing a new members class, and we were going around the circle, and I realized I wanted to point out that this church has been here for a long time. And so I wanted to point to the building donation list on the wall, and I pointed over there, and it wasn't there. Sorry, Reverend Marty. It wasn't there on the wall. I forgot, or I just didn't put it back up. It's back there now over by Steve over there. But what would happen if you went over and you looked at all those names, you probably wouldn't know a single one of them. But the really cool thing about them is we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for them. This building would have never been purchased. And hopefully, because we're all stewards of this place, there'll be a day where none of us are here and people might be talking about us. Because we're a part of something that's always honoring our past, but honoring what's to come too. And that's an awesome aspect of spiritual community. I like to think in our own lives and in our own church that we've been given a great blessing in the sense of getting a glimpse into the truth of who we are. It's very challenging the way that the world works or the way people can be, that a lot of people don't get to know. They live their whole lives without a glimpse of who they really are in the vision and eyes of the divine. I think that we're reflective of the great poem, I Stand at the Door, by Sam Shepard, that a congregant right here shared with me a couple of years ago. And Shepard was well known in the Alcoholics Anonymous community. And he shares these words, but to me they're descriptive of who many of us are as individuals, but also who we are as spiritual community. He says, I stay near the door. I neither go too far in nor stay too far out. The door is the most important door in the world. It is the door through which men walk when they find God. There's no use my going way inside and staying there when so many are still outside, and they, as much as I, crave to know where the door is. And all that so many ever find is only the wall where a door ought to be. They creep along the wall like blind men, with outstretched groping hands, feeling for a door, knowing there must be a door, yet they never find it. So I stay near the door. And you can see the power in being like a door, being like an opening for others to come into the awareness that you've been able to have about yourself. And Shepard is saying here, it's great to go inside of the divine, but you don't want to be so within that puffy white cloud you go on in the meditation that you stay there forever. We need to come and bring our feet back into the ground to recognize the great responsibility that comes in being aware of the spiritual truth of who we are, which is to be an example for others to find it in their own time, in their own way, through their own faith, through their own understanding. Shepard closes this poem this way. He says, I admire the people who go way in, but I wish they would not forget how it was before they got in. Then they would be able to help the people who have not even found the door, or the people who want to run away again from God. You can go in too deeply and stay in too long, and forget the people outside the door. As for me, I shall take my old accustomed place, near enough to God to hear him, and know he is there, but not so far from men as to not hear them, and remember they are there too. Where? Outside the door, thousands of them, millions of them, but, more important for me, one of them, 2 of them, 10 of them, whose hands I am intended to put on the latch. So I shall stay by the door and wait for those who seek it. I had rather be a doorkeeper, so I stay near the door. And so in closing, I invite each of us to do perhaps what is the most courageous thing to do, which is to stand in your own magnificence. Stand in the realization of the truth of who you are. And know by doing that, you grant the most selfless act of humility in being of service to those whom you love and care for around you, to learn the courage to do the same thing. So thank you for your time today. It's great to be here.